The Cartier diamonds caught the ballroom's chandelier light perfectly as she swept past me, my husband's mistress, wearing my grandmother's jewelry with the confidence of ownership. What she didn't know was that those sparkling gems adorning her throat and wrists were worth exactly $50. High-quality replicas I'd commissioned months ago when I first suspected Marcus was helping himself to more than just my heart. The real diamonds, worth over $200,000, were safely locked away while I watched her parade around in costume jewelry, completely oblivious to the trap I had set. That's how my marriage of 12 years ended, not with tears or pleading, but with the satisfying click of handcuffs as security detained Victoria Ashworth for theft at the most prestigious charity gala in the city. But to understand how we arrived at that moment, I need to take you back to where it all began. Before we continue with Mia's carefully orchestrated revenge, I want to invite you to join our community of survivors and thrivers. If stories of women reclaiming their power resonate with you, please hit subscribe. It's completely free and helps support more tales of triumph over betrayal. Now, let's see how a seemingly perfect marriage began to crack at its foundation. My name is Mia Blackwood, and for 12 years, I believed I was living a fairy tale. Marcus Blackwood, heir to Blackwood Industries, had swept me off my feet during my senior year at Columbia. I was a scholarship student studying art history, working 3 jobs to pay for textbooks, when this devastatingly handsome business major walked into Professor Hammond's Renaissance art seminar and changed my life forever. Marcus had everything: old money, new ambitions, and a smile that made me forget my own name. Our courtship was something out of a romantic movie. Weekend trips to the Hamptons, Broadway shows in box seats, dinners at restaurants where the waitstaff knew his family by name. When he proposed, with his great-grandmother's emerald ring on the terrace of the Plaza Hotel, I actually pinched myself to make sure I wasn't dreaming. The wedding was featured in Town and Country magazine. 500 guests, St. Patrick's Cathedral, reception at the Metropolitan Club. I wore a Vera Wang gown that cost more than my parents' annual income, and Marcus looked like a prince in his custom Armani tuxedo. My mother cried through the entire ceremony, overwhelmed by the grandeur of it all. "You've done it, sweetheart," she whispered as she hugged me after the reception. "You've really made it." For the first few years, I truly believed I had. Marcus was attentive, generous, proud to show me off at company functions and charity galas. We lived in a Park Avenue penthouse that had been in his family for 3 generations, surrounded by priceless art and antiques that told the story of Blackwood's success across decades. I quit my job at the museum to focus on being the perfect wife, hosting dinner parties for Marcus's business associates, serving on the boards of various charities, learning to navigate the complex social hierarchy of Manhattan's elite. The jewelry came gradually, presented as tokens of Marcus's love and appreciation. A sapphire tennis bracelet for our first anniversary, diamond earrings for my birthday, a pearl necklace that had belonged to his grandmother when I organized a particularly successful fundraiser for the Children's Hospital. Each piece was exquisite, museum quality, with provenance that traced back generations through the Blackwood family vault. But the crown jewel, literally and figuratively, was the Blackwood Diamond Suite, a necklace, bracelet, and earring set that had been crafted in 1920 by Cartier for Marcus's great-great-grandmother. The diamonds were flawless, the craftsmanship extraordinary, the history priceless. Marcus presented it to me on our 5th anniversary with great ceremony, having it delivered by armed guard from the bank vault where it was kept. "These belong to the woman who bears the Blackwood name," he said, as he fastened the necklace around my throat. "They're yours now, completely and forever." I felt the weight of history and responsibility settling around my neck, along with those diamonds. Looking back, I should have paid more attention to the subtle changes that began around our 7th year. Marcus started working later, claiming the company was expanding into new markets. Weekend golf games with business partners became more frequent. Our conversations grew shorter, more focused on logistics, whose event we needed to attend, which charity function required our presence, when the housekeeper was coming. The physical distance developed slowly. Marcus claimed exhaustion from 14-hour workdays when he'd turn away from my touch. I bought new lingerie, planned romantic dinners, tried everything the relationship experts suggested to keep the spark alive. He participated half-heartedly, his mind clearly elsewhere, checking his phone even during our most intimate moments. "Is everything all right between us?" I asked one evening after he'd barely touched the elaborate meal I'd prepared, his favorite lamb with rosemary, paired with the wine from our honeymoon in Tuscany. "Just work stress, darling," he replied, without looking up from his phone. "The Henderson acquisition is more complicated than we anticipated." I believed him because I wanted to, because the alternative, that my husband was losing interest in me, in us, was too terrifying to contemplate. I was Mia Blackwood now, had been for 12 years. Without that identity, without Marcus, who was I? The first real crack in my perfect world appeared on a Tuesday in October. I was organizing my jewelry for our upcoming trip to Marcus's cousin's wedding in Charleston when I noticed something odd. The Cartier suite was in its case, exactly where it should be, but something felt different. The weight seemed wrong when I lifted the necklace, and there was a tiny scratch on one of the central diamonds that I'd never noticed before. I took it to Brennan and Associates, the jewelry appraisers Marcus's family had used for decades. Thomas Brennan had handled insurance appraisals for the Blackwood collection since before Marcus was born. His assessment took 3 days, and when he called me back into his office, his expression was grave. "Mrs. Blackwood," he said carefully, "I'm afraid there's been some kind of mistake. This isn't the original Cartier suite." The room seemed to tilt around me. "What do you mean?" "These are exceptionally high-quality replicas, probably created within the last 6 months. The work is masterful. Someone with considerable skill and resources commissioned these, but they're not the original diamonds." My hands trembled as I reached for the jewelry case. "Are you absolutely certain?" Thomas nodded grimly. "I've appraised the original suite multiple times over the years. I know every facet, every setting detail, every tiny imperfection that makes those diamonds unique. These are beautiful fakes, but they're definitely fakes." The implications crashed over me like a tidal wave. Someone had replaced my jewelry with replicas. The only person with access to our bedroom safe, besides me, was Marcus. But why would he replace my jewelry with fakes? Where were the originals? That night, I waited until Marcus was asleep before conducting a thorough inventory of my entire collection. The sapphire bracelet? Fake. The diamond earrings? Fake. Even my grandmother's pearl necklace, the one possession I'd brought into the marriage from my old life, had been replaced with a convincing but worthless imitation. Over the following weeks, I began paying attention to details I'd previously overlooked. Marcus's phone calls that ended abruptly when I entered the room, weekend business trips that seemed to require no follow-up meetings, the way his secretary, usually chatty and friendly, became awkward and evasive when I called the office. I hired a private investigator, something I never thought I'd do. James Morrison was recommended by a friend whose husband had been embezzling from their joint accounts. Morrison was discreet, professional, and devastatingly thorough. Within 2 weeks, he'd confirmed my worst fears and uncovered details that made the jewelry theft seem almost trivial by comparison. Marcus was having an affair with Victoria Ashworth, the director of acquisitions at rival investment firm Sterling and Partners. But this wasn't a simple case of infidelity driven by passion or midlife crisis. Victoria and Marcus had been systematically undermining Blackwood Industries from within, using pillow talk and stolen inside information to help Sterling acquire companies that Blackwood had been pursuing for months. The jewelry theft was part of a larger pattern of asset liquidation. Marcus had been converting family heirlooms, art pieces, and investments into cash, which was then funneled into offshore accounts that he and Victoria could access once they destroyed Blackwood Industries and escaped to start fresh in Switzerland. But Morrison's most shocking discovery was yet to come. Victoria wasn't just Marcus's mistress and business partner. In crime, she was his wife. They'd been married in a private ceremony in the Cayman Islands 8 months earlier, making my own marriage a legal fiction. For nearly a year, I'd been nothing more than an unwitting accomplice in my husband's elaborate fraud scheme. The night Morrison delivered his final report, I sat in our penthouse living room surrounded by family portraits and antique furniture that probably weren't even real anymore, trying to process the magnitude of Marcus's betrayal. Not only had he been stealing from me and his own family's company, but he'd committed bigamy, making me complicit in his crimes simply by continuing to live as his wife. I could have confronted him immediately, could have called the police or family lawyers. Instead, I chose a different path. If Marcus wanted to play games, I would show him how the game was really played. My first call was to Thomas Brennan. I needed him to create perfect replicas of all my stolen jewelry, not just accurate copies, but pieces that would fool even Victoria's undoubtedly discerning eye. The cost was substantial, nearly $50,000, but I charged it to one of Marcus's credit cards. If he noticed the expense, he never mentioned it. While the replicas were being crafted, I began my own investigation into Victoria Ashworth. Social media revealed a woman who lived for luxury and attention, posting endless photos of expensive dinners, designer clothes, and exotic vacations. She had a particular obsession with jewelry, often featuring close-up shots of whatever pieces she was wearing, with detailed captions about their provenance and value. More importantly, she had a history of legal troubles. Morrison's background check revealed 2 previous arrests for theft. Both charges eventually dropped due to lack of evidence or witness intimidation. Victoria had a pattern of targeting wealthy men, gaining access to their valuables, and then disappearing when suspicion arose. Marcus was just her latest mark, though he was too blinded by lust and greed to recognize the warning signs. I spent weeks learning Victoria's schedule, her habits, her vulnerabilities. She had a key to our penthouse. Marcus had given it to her months ago, claiming she needed access for business meetings when I was out. She visited regularly when she thought I was at my charity events or art classes, helping herself to our liquor, using our bedroom, and apparently continuing to rifle through my belongings, looking for additional pieces to steal. The replicas were ready 3 weeks before the Children's Hospital Gala, the most prestigious charity event of the season. I'd been planning this event for months, serving as co-chair of the organizing committee. 500 of the city's most influential people would attend, including reporters from society pages and prominent members of the legal and financial communities. On a Tuesday evening, when Marcus claimed to be working late, I positioned the fake replicas exactly where my authentic jewelry had been stored. The Cartier suite went in the bedroom safe, the other pieces in my dressing room jewelry box. Then I installed tiny cameras throughout the penthouse, Morrison's suggestion for gathering evidence. I didn't have to wait long. The very next afternoon, while I was supposedly at a board meeting for the Museum of Fine Arts, Victoria let herself into our home. The cameras captured everything: her systematic search through my jewelry collection, her obvious delight at discovering the hidden Cartier suite, and her careful selection of the most impressive pieces. What the cameras also captured was her phone call to Marcus, gloating about her discovery. "Darling, you didn't tell me she had the complete Cartier suite," Victoria cooed into her phone. "These will be perfect for the gala. Nothing says new money like parading around in stolen diamonds." Their laughter made my stomach turn, but it also steeled my resolve. They thought they were so clever, so superior to the naive wife who'd never suspected their elaborate deception. They had no idea they were walking directly into a trap I'd spent months constructing. The week before the gala, I made several important phone calls. The first was to Detective Sarah Chen of the NYPD's Financial Crimes Unit, a contact Morrison had provided. Detective Chen was immediately interested in the evidence I'd gathered, particularly the financial records showing Marcus's systematic liquidation of family assets. My second call was to Elizabeth Sterling, the founding partner of Sterling and Partners. Elizabeth was a formidable woman in her 70s who'd built her firm through decades of shrewd deals and ethical business practices. When I explained that her director of acquisitions was engaged in corporate espionage and fraud, she was initially skeptical, but the evidence Morrison had gathered was irrefutable, and Elizabeth's reaction was swift and decisive. "Ms. Ashworth will be terminated immediately," she said in her crisp, no-nonsense tone. "Sterling and Partners has built its reputation on integrity, and we will not tolerate this behavior. You can expect our full cooperation with any legal proceedings." My final call was to Marcus's uncle, Richard Blackwood, the family patriarch who still held controlling interest in Blackwood Industries. Richard had always been fond of me, appreciating my dedication to family traditions and charitable works. His response to learning about Marcus's betrayal was explosive. "That ungrateful whelp," he thundered over the phone. "After everything this family has given him, everything we've built, he conspires with our competitors to destroy us? Mia, dear, you have my complete support in whatever action you choose to take." The gala was held at the Waldorf Astoria, the ballroom transformed into a glittering wonderland of flowers, candlelight, and crystal. I arrived alone, wearing a stunning midnight blue Valentino gown and my grandmother's authentic pearl necklace, one of the few pieces I'd kept safely hidden from Victoria's thieving hands. My hair was swept up in an elegant chignon, my makeup flawless, my smile serene despite the storm of emotions churning inside me. Marcus arrived 20 minutes later with Victoria on his arm. She was resplendent in a scarlet-red dress that hugged her curves perfectly, but what really caught everyone's attention was the jewelry. The Cartier diamond suite blazed around her throat and wrists, catching the ballroom's lights like captured starfire. She'd styled her dark hair to showcase the earrings, and her smile radiated the confidence of a woman wearing $250,000 worth of diamonds. "Magnificent," I heard someone whisper as they passed. "Wherever did she get such exquisite pieces?" Victoria preened under the attention, clearly loving every moment of her debut as Marcus's companion. She introduced herself to society matrons and business leaders with the practiced ease of someone who'd studied this world from the outside and finally gained entrance. The Cartier suite was her passport into a realm she'd only dreamed of accessing. I watched them work the room together, Marcus introducing Victoria as his very dear friend, while she displayed the stolen jewelry like trophies. They made a striking couple, him in his perfectly tailored tuxedo, her in her show-stopping gown, and my diamonds. To anyone who didn't know the truth, they looked like the epitome of success and sophistication. What they didn't notice was Detective Chen positioned near the entrance, or the plainclothes officers stationed throughout the ballroom, or the security cameras that would record every moment of what was about to unfold. I waited until the perfect moment during the cocktail hour, when the crowd was dense and conversations were flowing freely. Victoria was holding court near the auction display, the Cartier necklace catching the light as she gestured animatedly while discussing the evening's charitable cause with potential donors. "Victoria, darling," I called out as I approached, my voice carrying the warm friendliness I'd perfected over years of social events. "You look absolutely stunning tonight." She turned toward me with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Mia, how lovely to see you. Thank you so much for organizing such a beautiful evening. I see you're wearing some gorgeous jewelry," I continued, moving closer to admire the necklace. Several other women gathered around us, drawn by the sparkle of the diamonds and the promise of gossip. Those pieces are absolutely breathtaking. The craftsmanship is extraordinary. Victoria's smile became more genuine, her vanity overriding any caution she might have felt. "Thank you. I'm so glad you appreciate them. They're Cartier, actually, from the 1920s. The history and artistry are just incredible, aren't they?" "Oh my goodness, are those the Blackwood diamonds?" gasped Margaret Fairfax, the society reporter for Town and Country. "I remember when they were featured in that article about historic jewelry collections. They're absolutely legendary." Victoria's cheeks flushed with pleasure. "They are indeed. Marcus thought I should wear them tonight, since we're supporting such an important cause. He felt they deserved to be seen and appreciated, rather than locked away in some vault." More people were gathering now, drawn by the mention of the famous Blackwood collection. Victoria was basking in the attention, completely unaware that she was digging her own grave with every word. "May I?" I asked, reaching toward the necklace as if to examine it more closely. "I've always been fascinated by the history of these pieces. Marcus's great-great-grandmother had such exquisite taste."
Victoria leaned forward obligingly, clearly proud to display her acquisition. I made a show of studying the diamonds carefully, turning the central stone to catch the light from different angles. "Absolutely remarkable," I murmured, loud enough for our growing audience to hear. "The way these catch the light is just perfect. Almost too perfect, wouldn't you say?" Something in my tone made Victoria stiffen slightly. "I'm not sure what you mean." I straightened up with a bright smile, my voice carrying clearly across the increasingly quiet space around us. "Oh, I just mean they sparkle so beautifully, just like the replicas I had made when I needed to store the authentic suite in our more secure facility. The craftsmanship on these reproductions is truly exceptional. You can barely tell they're just high-quality glass and silver." The silence that followed was deafening. Victoria's face went through a remarkable transformation: confusion, comprehension, and then pure horror as she realized what I'd just announced to 50 of the city's most connected people. That's impossible," she stammered, her hand flying to the necklace. "These are real. Marcus gave them to me. They're worth—" "About $50, actually," I continued pleasantly, "though the sentimental value is considerably higher, since they represent my husband's attempt to steal $250,000 worth of my personal property. The real Cartier suite is safely secured at Brennan & Associates, where it's been appraised and authenticated multiple times over the past several weeks." Victoria's face had gone completely white, the red lipstick she wore standing out like blood against her pale skin. Around us, the crowd was murmuring, phones appearing as people began documenting what was clearly becoming the scandal of the season. "Marcus!" Victoria called out desperately, looking around for him. But Marcus had vanished the moment he'd realized what was happening, leaving her to face the consequences alone. Detective Chen chose that moment to make her appearance, her badge clearly visible as she approached our little group. "Miss Victoria Ashworth, I need to speak with you about some stolen property." "This is a mistake," Victoria protested, her voice rising to a panicked pitch. "I don't know what she's talking about. These were given to me. I haven't stolen anything." "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to remain calm," Detective Chen said firmly. "You're being detained for questioning regarding the theft of jewelry from the Blackwood residence. The cameras clearly show you entering the premises without permission and removing items from Mrs. Blackwood's collection." As the security officers moved in to escort Victoria from the ballroom, she finally lost her composure completely. "You set me up!" she screamed at me, struggling against the officer's hold. "This is entrapment! You knew I would take them!" "I knew you already had taken them," I replied calmly. "Multiple times, in fact. I simply provided you with an opportunity to display your theft publicly, wearing replicas of the jewelry you'd already stolen and sold." The truth hit her like a physical blow. Her mouth opened and closed soundlessly as she realized the full scope of what had happened. Not only had she been caught red-handed with stolen goods, but she'd been parading around in fake jewelry while believing herself to be wearing priceless diamonds. As they led her away, her final words echoed across the now silent ballroom. "Where's Marcus? He promised he'd protect me. Marcus!" But Marcus Blackwood was nowhere to be found. In fact, as Detective Chen informed me that evening, he'd been arrested at JFK Airport attempting to board a flight to Switzerland with nearly $3 million in liquidated assets. The aftermath was swift and comprehensive. Marcus and Victoria both faced multiple federal charges: fraud, theft, conspiracy, and, in Marcus's case, bigamy. The media coverage was extensive, with every society page and financial publication covering the scandal that had brought down one of New York's oldest families. Victoria's trial revealed the full scope of their crimes. Over 18 months, they'd systematically looted the Blackwood family assets while feeding insider information to Sterling and partners. The jewelry theft was just one small part of a much larger embezzlement scheme that had cost the family business nearly $10 million. But perhaps the most satisfying moment came during Victoria's sentencing hearing. As part of her plea agreement, she was required to return all stolen property. The real Cartier suite, along with the rest of my jewelry, had been recovered from a safety deposit box she'd rented under an assumed name. When the prosecutor presented the authentic pieces as evidence, Victoria saw them for the first time since stealing them. The difference between the real diamonds and the replicas was subtle but unmistakable to anyone who knew what to look for. The authentic stones had a depth and fire that no imitation could match, a luminosity that spoke of nearly a century of careful preservation. The defendant was unaware that she'd been wearing costume jewelry to the gala, the prosecutor explained to the judge. She believed she was displaying authentic pieces worth over $200,000. Instead, she'd been publicly humiliated while wearing replicas worth approximately $50. Victoria's attorney tried to argue that this somehow constituted entrapment, but the judge was unimpressed. Ms. Ashworth had already committed theft by taking the original jewelry. Mrs. Blackwood simply documented that theft and provided an opportunity for public confession. The defendant's humiliation is a consequence of her own criminal actions, not of any entrapment. Victoria received 5 years in federal prison. Marcus received 12 years, with additional charges pending for the bigamy and corporate fraud. Sterling and partners faced regulatory sanctions but survived, thanks to Elizabeth Sterling's immediate cooperation with authorities and the swift termination of Victoria's employment. As for me, I found myself in an unexpected position. The scandal had made me something of a celebrity in certain circles, the wronged wife who'd orchestrated the perfect revenge. Society magazines wanted interviews, morning shows requested appearances, and several publishers approached me about writing a book. But what I wanted most was to rebuild my life on my own terms. The penthouse was sold, along with most of its contents, to pay restitution to the Blackwood family business. I bought a smaller apartment on the Upper West Side, something that felt like home rather than a museum. Richard Blackwood offered me a position with the Family Foundation, overseeing their charitable giving and cultural programs. It was meaningful work that used my art history background while connecting me to causes I genuinely cared about. For the first time in years, I was earning my own money and making my own decisions.
The jewelry, my authentic jewelry, remained mostly in secure storage. I kept a few special pieces, my grandmother's pearls, a simple diamond bracelet that had been my mother's, and the sapphire ring Marcus had given me for our first anniversary, before everything went wrong. The Cartier suite went back into the family vault, where it would wait for the next generation of Blackwood women. 6 months after the trial, I received an unexpected visitor. Rebecca Morrison, James Morrison's daughter and a recent law school graduate, was starting her own practice focusing on financial crimes and asset recovery. She'd followed my case closely and wanted to offer her services to other women in similar situations.
There are so many victims of financial fraud who never get justice, she explained over coffee at a cafe near my new apartment, usually because they don't have the resources or knowledge to fight back effectively. Your case showed what's possible when someone has the courage and means to expose the truth. We ended up working together, using my experience and her legal expertise to help other women who discovered their husbands were stealing from them. It was satisfying work, turning my personal trauma into a tool for helping others. A year after the gala, I attended the same charity event again. This time I wore a simple black dress and my grandmother's pearls, my hair down in soft waves rather than the elaborate updo I'd favored as Mrs. Marcus Blackwood. I looked different, felt different, more like myself than I had in years. Several people approached me during the evening, some offering sympathy, others expressing admiration for how I'd handled the situation. But the conversation that meant the most came from an unexpected source. "Mrs. Blackwood?" The voice was hesitant, apologetic. I turned to find a young woman in her 20s, clearly nervous about approaching me. "It's just Mia now," I said gently, recognizing something vulnerable in her expression. "I'm Sarah Chen," she said, Detective Chen's daughter. "My mom told me about your case, and I think my stepfather is stealing from my mother, the same way your husband was stealing from you. I don't know what to do." I spent an hour talking with Sarah, explaining the warning signs I'd missed, the evidence I'd gathered, the resources available to women in her mother's situation. By the end of the evening, I'd given her Rebecca Morrison's contact information and promised to do whatever I could to help. That conversation crystallized something I'd been feeling for months. My experience with Marcus and Victoria hadn't just been about personal revenge. It had been about refusing to be a victim, about taking control of my own narrative, about ensuring that truth prevailed over manipulation and theft. The fake jewelry had been the perfect trap because it represented everything that was wrong with Marcus and Victoria's approach to life. They valued appearances over substance, theft over honest work, deception over truth. When Victoria strutted around that ballroom wearing $50 replicas while believing she was displaying priceless diamonds, she was embodying the hollow nature of their entire scheme. The real Cartier suite represented something entirely different. Generations of family history, legitimate wealth built through honest business practices, beauty created by master craftsmen and preserved through decades of careful stewardship. Victoria could steal the physical pieces, but she could never possess their true value or meaning. In the end, that's what brought down their entire operation. They thought they could steal not just jewelry and money, but identity and history and belonging. They believed that by taking my possessions, they could somehow claim my place in the world Marcus had introduced me to 12 years earlier. But identity isn't something that can be stolen, and belonging isn't something that can be faked. When Victoria walked into that ballroom wearing my jewelry, she wasn't becoming me. She was revealing herself as exactly what she was, a thief who could imitate the appearance of wealth and status, but would never possess their substance. 2 years after that night, I received a letter from Victoria in prison. She'd been moved to a minimum security facility and was working toward earning her GED. The letter was part apology, part justification, and part plea for understanding. "I know you probably think I'm just a gold digger who got what she deserved," she wrote. "And maybe that's true. But I grew up with nothing, watching women like you live the life I dreamed of having. When Marcus offered me that life, even if it meant destroying yours, I thought I deserved it. I thought I'd worked for it by being everything he said he wanted."
She was right that I didn't owe her understanding or forgiveness, but reading her letter, I felt something unexpected. Not sympathy exactly, but a recognition of how seductive Marcus's promises must have been to someone who'd grown up believing that wealth and status were the only things that mattered. The difference between us wasn't moral superiority on my part. It was that I'd learned, through 12 years of marriage and its spectacular implosion, that the things I'd thought mattered most, the jewelry, the penthouse, the social status, were ultimately just props in someone else's performance. The real treasures in my life were the relationships I'd built, the work that gave me purpose, the knowledge that I could survive betrayal and emerge stronger. Those were things that couldn't be stolen, couldn't be faked, couldn't be replicated no matter how skilled the craftsman. Victoria's greatest punishment wasn't the prison sentence or the public humiliation. It was that she'd spent months believing she'd finally achieved the life she'd always wanted, only to discover it was as fake as the jewelry she'd worn to claim it. In trying to steal my identity, she'd lost her own. As for Marcus, I never heard from him directly, but through his family, I learned that prison had been a harsh awakening for someone who'd spent his entire life believing he was entitled to whatever he wanted. His attempts to blame everyone else for his crimes, me for setting him up, Victoria for seducing him, his family for not understanding his vision, had fallen on deaf ears with both judges and fellow inmates. The last I heard, he was working in the prison library, teaching literacy classes to other inmates. Perhaps he had finally found something worthwhile to do with his life, something that created value rather than destroying it. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd confronted him directly instead of orchestrating that public exposure. Would he have admitted his crimes, showed remorse, tried to make amends? Or would he have found a way to manipulate the situation, to make me doubt my own evidence, to convince me that I was overreacting to what he'd frame as harmless indiscretions? I'll never know, and I've made peace with that uncertainty. What I do know is that the path I chose, gathering evidence, building an airtight case, exposing the truth publicly, ensured that justice was served not just for me, but for all of Marcus's victims. The employees who lost their jobs when Blackwood Industries nearly collapsed, the investors who trusted him with their money, the family members who believed in his integrity. The charity gala had been the perfect venue for that exposure because it represented everything Marcus claimed to value: philanthropy, community service, social responsibility. Having his crimes revealed in that setting, surrounded by the very people he'd been trying to impress, stripped away any possibility of spinning the narrative in his favor. And Victoria's decision to wear the stolen jewelry to that event, to flaunt her theft in front of the entire social establishment, had made her complicit in her own downfall. She could have returned the pieces quietly, could have ended the affair and walked away. Instead, she chose to make a public statement about her conquest, never realizing she was announcing her crimes to hundreds of witnesses.
The irony that she'd been wearing fakes while believing them to be authentic added a layer of poetic justice that I couldn't have planned if I'd tried. It perfectly encapsulated the hollow nature of everything she and Marcus had built together, beautiful on the surface, but worthless underneath. 3 years after that night, I'm living a life I never could have imagined as Mrs. Marcus Blackwood. I'm financially independent, professionally fulfilled, and surrounded by relationships built on honesty rather than utility. I've learned to value authenticity over appearances, substance over style, truth over the comfortable lies that once defined my existence. The jewelry sits mostly unused in its secure storage, a reminder of a life I once lived but no longer need. Occasionally, I'll wear a piece to a special event, my grandmother's pearls to a family wedding, the sapphire bracelet to a museum gala, but they're accessories to my life now, not symbols of my identity. The real diamonds still catch the light beautifully when they're worn, still represent the artistry and history that makes them valuable,
But their worth isn't diminished by having been temporarily replaced with fakes, any more than my worth was diminished by Marcus's betrayal. In the end, that's perhaps the most important lesson from that entire experience. Authenticity isn't something that can be stolen or faked or replicated. It's something that exists independent of external validation, something that persists through betrayal and emerges stronger from adversity. Victoria thought she could steal my life by taking my jewelry and my husband. But what she actually stole were just objects and a relationship that had long since lost its meaning. The life worth having, the one built on truth, purpose, and genuine connection, was never hers to take. That's what she learned too late, standing in that ballroom wearing $50 replicas while believing them to be priceless. The difference between authentic and fake goes far deeper than what meets the eye, and no amount of skillful imitation can ever truly replicate the real thing. The champagne flutes clinked together in perfect harmony as Manhattan's elite gathered for the annual Metropolitan Arts Foundation Gala, but all I could focus on was the way those stolen diamonds caught the crystal chandelier light around my husband's mistress's throat. What made my heart race with anticipation, rather than anger, was knowing that every sparkling stone adorning Celeste Hamilton's neck and wrists was worth exactly $47. Premium glass replicas I'd commissioned from a theatrical prop house 3 weeks ago. The authentic jewelry, valued at over $300,000, was safely locked in a vault across town while I watched her parade around in elaborate costume pieces, completely unaware that she was about to become the evening's most memorable entertainment. But let me take you back to where this carefully orchestrated evening of justice truly began, because revenge this sweet doesn't happen overnight. It requires patience, planning, and a thorough understanding of your enemy's weaknesses. My name is Isabella Chen Morrison, and for 15 years I believed I was living the perfect upper-class dream. My husband, Jonathan Morrison, was a successful hedge fund manager who'd built Morrison Capital from a small firm into one of New York's most respected investment houses. We met at a charity auction where I was representing the museum where I worked as a curator, and he was there bidding on 19th century paintings with the casual confidence of someone who never had to check his bank balance. Our courtship was textbook romantic weekend getaways to Martha's Vineyard, private viewings at galleries, dinners at restaurants where reservations were booked months in advance. When he proposed with the flawless emerald-cut diamond on the rooftop terrace of our penthouse, I actually had to sit down because my knees went weak with joy. The wedding was featured in Architectural Digest. 200 guests at the Botanical Garden, reception under a canopy of white orchids that cost more than most people's cars. I wore my great-grandmother's vintage Chanel gown altered to fit perfectly, while Jonathan looked devastatingly handsome in a custom Savile Row tuxedo. My parents, both retired teachers from Boston, kept whispering to each other throughout the ceremony, overwhelmed by the sheer extravagance of it all. For over a decade, our life was everything I dreamed of and more. Jonathan was attentive, successful, and genuinely proud to have me as his wife. We lived in a stunning penthouse overlooking Central Park, filled with museum-quality art that I'd helped select and authenticate. I eventually left my museum position to focus on our family's philanthropic foundation, organizing charity events and serving on cultural boards throughout the city. The jewelry collection grew gradually over the years, each piece chosen with care and presented with meaning. A sapphire and diamond tennis bracelet for our 5th anniversary, matching earrings when I successfully organized a fundraiser that raised $2 million for children's education, a stunning pearl and diamond choker that had belonged to Jonathan's grandmother when I completed my master's degree in art authentication. But the crown jewel of my collection was the Morrison Heritage Suite. A necklace, bracelet, and earring set originally created by Tiffany in 1925 for Jonathan's great-grandmother. The diamonds were exceptional, the platinum settings exquisite, and the family history invaluable. Jonathan presented it to me on our 10th anniversary with enormous ceremony, having it delivered from the bank vault by armed security. "These have been waiting for the right woman to wear them," he said as he fastened the necklace around my throat that evening. "They belong to you now, completely and forever. You're not just my wife, you're the keeper of family tradition." I should have noticed the changes that began creeping into our marriage around year 12. Jonathan started working longer hours, claiming new international clients required late-night calls with London and Tokyo. Weekend golf games with business partners became more frequent and lasted longer. Our conversations grew increasingly surface level, focused on schedules and social obligations rather than dreams and feelings. The physical intimacy faded gradually. Jonathan blamed stress from expanding the firm, exhaustion from 16-hour workdays, the pressure of managing increasingly complex portfolios. I tried everything: romantic dinners, surprise weekend trips, new lingerie, couples massage sessions. He participated half-heartedly, his attention clearly elsewhere, checking his phone even during our most private moments. "Are we okay?" I asked one evening after he'd barely touched the elaborate anniversary dinner I'd prepared, lobster thermidor and champagne from our honeymoon in France, served on our wedding china. "Just work pressure, darling," he replied absently, scrolling through emails. "The Henderson portfolio is requiring more attention than anticipated, and the new Singapore office is having regulatory issues." I accepted his explanations because the alternative was too frightening to consider. I was Isabella Morrison now, had been for 15 years. My entire adult identity was built around this marriage, this life, this version of myself. Without Jonathan, without this world we'd created together, who would I be?
The first crack in my perfect facade appeared on a rainy Thursday in November. I was reorganizing my jewelry collection for our upcoming trip to Jonathan's business partner's wedding in Napa when something felt wrong. The Heritage Suite was in its custom case, exactly where it belonged, but when I lifted the necklace, the weight seemed different, lighter somehow, and there was a tiny imperfection in one of the side stones that I'd never noticed before. I took the pieces to Marcus Goldstein, the jewelry appraiser Jonathan's family had used for 3 generations. Marcus had handled insurance valuations for the Morrison collection since before Jonathan was born, and his expertise was unquestioned. His assessment took 4 days, and when he called me back to his office, his expression was troubled. "Mrs. Morrison," he said carefully, "I'm afraid we have a significant problem. These are not the original Tiffany pieces." The room seemed to spin around me. "What do you mean, not original?" "These are exceptional replicas, probably created within the last 2 months. The craftsmanship is remarkable. Whoever commissioned these had considerable resources and access to the original pieces for reference, but they're definitely not authentic." My mouth went dry. "Are you absolutely certain?" Marcus nodded gravely. "I've appraised the original Heritage Suite at least 8 times over the past 20 years. I know every facet, every microscopic inclusion, every tiny detail that makes those diamonds unique. These are beautiful fakes, but they're unquestionably fakes." The implications hit me like a physical blow. Someone had replaced my jewelry with replicas. The only person with access to our bedroom safe besides me was Jonathan. But why would my husband replace my jewelry with fakes? Where were the authentic pieces? That night, I waited until Jonathan was deep in sleep before conducting a systematic inventory of my entire collection. The sapphire bracelet? Fake. The pearl choker? Fake. Even the simple diamond studs I wore almost daily had been replaced with convincing but worthless imitations. Over the following days, I began paying attention to details I'd previously overlooked. Jonathan's phone calls that ended abruptly when I entered his study. Business dinners that never seemed to require follow-up meetings. The way his assistant, usually warm and chatty, became awkward and evasive when I called the office. I made a decision that would have seemed impossible just weeks earlier. I hired a private investigator. David Reeves came highly recommended by a friend whose husband had been embezzling from their joint business accounts.
Reeves was professional, discreet, and devastatingly thorough. Within 10 days, he'd confirmed my worst fears and uncovered details that made the jewelry theft seem almost trivial. Jonathan was having an affair with Celeste Hamilton, a junior partner at competing investment firm Sterling and Associates. But this wasn't just a midlife crisis or temporary lapse in judgment. Celeste and Jonathan had been conducting a systematic campaign of corporate espionage, using pillow talk and stolen confidential information to help Sterling acquire clients and deals that Morrison Capital had been pursuing for months. The jewelry theft was part of a larger liquidation scheme. Jonathan had been converting family heirlooms, art pieces, and other valuable assets into cash, which was then transferred to offshore accounts that he and Celeste could access. They were planning to destroy Morrison Capital from within, then disappear together to start fresh in the Cayman Islands with millions in stolen assets. But Reeves' most shocking discovery was yet to come. Financial records showed that Celeste wasn't just Jonathan's mistress and criminal accomplice. They'd been legally married in a private ceremony in Las Vegas 6 months earlier. My 15-year marriage was legally meaningless, making me an unwitting accomplice in whatever crimes they were planning simply by continuing to live as Jonathan's wife. The night Reeves delivered his complete report, I sat in our living room surrounded by priceless art and antique furniture that probably weren't even authentic anymore, trying to process the scope of Jonathan's betrayal. He hadn't just been cheating and stealing, he'd committed bigamy, corporate fraud, and turned me into an unwitting criminal simply by maintaining the facade of our marriage. I could have confronted him immediately, could have called police or family lawyers or the FBI. Instead, I chose a different approach. If Jonathan and Celeste wanted to play elaborate games of deception, I would show them how such games were really won. My first call was to Marcus Goldstein. I needed him to create perfect replicas of all my stolen jewelry, not just convincing copies, but pieces so flawless they would fool even Celeste's apparently discerning eye. The cost was substantial, nearly $60,000, but I charged it to one of Jonathan's business credit cards. If he noticed the expense, he never mentioned it. While the new replicas were being crafted, I began studying Celeste Hamilton with the same intensity I'd once applied to authenticating Renaissance paintings. Social media revealed a woman obsessed with luxury and status, constantly posting photos of expensive dinners, designer clothes, and exotic vacations. She had a particular fascination with jewelry, often featuring close-up shots of whatever pieces she was wearing with detailed captions about their designers and estimated values. More importantly, background checks revealed a pattern of targeting wealthy men. Celeste had been married twice before, both marriages ending in messy divorces where she'd claimed significant portions of her ex-husband's assets. She specialized in seducing successful men, gaining access to their valuables and financial information, then disappearing when suspicion arose. Jonathan was just her latest victim, though he was too blinded by lust and greed to recognize the warning signs. I spent weeks learning Celeste's schedule, her habits, her vulnerabilities. She had a key to our penthouse. Jonathan had given it to her months ago under the pretense of needing access for business meetings when I was attending charity events. She visited regularly when she thought I was safely occupied elsewhere, helping herself to our wine, using our bedroom, and systematically cataloging my belongings for future theft. The theatrical replicas were completed 2 weeks before the Metropolitan Arts Foundation Gala, the most prestigious charity event of the winter season. As co-chair of the planning committee, I'd been working on this event for 6 months, coordinating with caterers, florists, and entertainment, while managing a guest list that included 400 of the city's most influential people. The timing was perfect. On a Tuesday evening, when Jonathan claimed to be working late on the Singapore expansion, I carefully positioned the fake replicas exactly where my authentic jewelry should have been. The heritage suite went in the bedroom safe, the other pieces in my dressing room jewelry armoire. Then I installed tiny surveillance cameras throughout the penthouse, Reeves' suggestion for gathering irrefutable evidence. I didn't have to wait long. The very next afternoon, while I was supposedly attending a board meeting for the Children's Museum, Celeste let herself into our home. The cameras captured everything in high definition: her systematic search through my jewelry collection, her obvious excitement at discovering the hidden heritage suite, and her careful selection of the most impressive pieces for what she clearly assumed would be her debut as Jonathan's official companion.
What the cameras also recorded was her phone call to Jonathan afterward, gloating about her discovery. "Darling, you didn't mention she had the complete Tiffany suite," Celeste purred into her phone, admiring herself in our bedroom mirror while wearing my fake jewelry. "These will be absolutely perfect for the gala. Nothing announces a woman's arrival in society quite like historic diamonds." Their laughter made my stomach churn, but it also strengthened my resolve. They thought they were so clever, so superior to the naive wife who'd never suspected their elaborate scheme. They had no idea they were walking directly into a trap I'd spent weeks constructing with military precision. The week before the gala, I made several crucial phone calls. The first was to Agent Sarah Martinez of the FBI's White Collar Crime Division, a contact Reeves had provided. Agent Martinez was immediately interested in the evidence I'd gathered, particularly the financial records showing Jonathan's systematic asset liquidation and the corporate espionage affecting multiple investment firms. My second call was to Robert Sterling, the senior partner at Sterling & Associates. Robert was a distinguished man in his 80s who'd built his firm through 5 decades of ethical business practices and impeccable reputation. When I explained that his junior partner was engaged in corporate espionage and fraud, he was initially skeptical, but the evidence Reeves had compiled was overwhelming, and Robert's response was swift and uncompromising. "Miss Hamilton will be terminated immediately and permanently," he said in his precise, no-nonsense tone. "Sterling & Associates has maintained its reputation through unwavering integrity, and we will not tolerate this behavior under any circumstances. You have our complete cooperation with all legal proceedings." My final call was to Jonathan's father, William Morrison, the family patriarch who'd founded Morrison Capital 40 years earlier. William had always treated me like the daughter he'd never had, appreciating my dedication to family traditions and cultural preservation. His reaction to learning about Jonathan's betrayal was explosive and immediate. "That ungrateful fool," he thundered over the phone. "After everything this family sacrificed to build this business, everything we've given him, he conspires with our competitors to destroy us? Isabella, my dear, you have my absolute and unconditional support in whatever action you choose to take." The gala was held at the Natural History Museum, the Great Hall transformed into a glittering wonderland of orchids, candles, and crystal installations. I arrived fashionably late, wearing an elegant emerald green Oscar de la Renta gown and my great-grandmother's authentic pearl necklace, one of the few pieces I'd kept hidden in a separate location from Celeste's searching hands. My hair was styled in a sophisticated low chignon, my makeup flawless, my smile serene, despite the tornado of emotions swirling inside me. Jonathan arrived 30 minutes later with Celeste on his arm, and the sight of them together nearly took my breath away. She was stunning in a form-fitting burgundy dress that emphasized every curve, but what really commanded attention was the jewelry. The heritage suite blazed around her throat and wrists like captured fire, the diamonds refracting the museum's dramatic lighting into rainbow prisms that danced across the prehistoric exhibits. "Absolutely magnificent," I heard someone whisper as they passed. "Where on earth did she acquire such extraordinary pieces?"
Celeste basked in the attention like a cat in sunshine, clearly savoring every moment of her society debut. She introduced herself to museum board members and corporate leaders with practiced grace, the stolen jewelry serving as her credentials for entry into a world she'd apparently studied from afar for years. The Heritage Suite was her passport into the upper echelons of New York society.
I watched them work the room together, Jonathan introducing Celeste as his dear friend and business associate, while she displayed my jewelry like battle trophies. They made an undeniably striking couple, him in his perfectly tailored Armani tuxedo, her in that show-stopping gown, and my family diamonds. To casual observers, they looked like the embodiment of success and sophistication. What they failed to notice was Agent Martinez, positioned near the auction displays, or the plainclothes FBI agents stationed throughout the museum, or the high-definition cameras that would record every moment of what was about to unfold. I waited for the perfect moment during the cocktail reception when the crowd was dense and conversations were flowing freely. Celeste was holding court near the dinosaur exhibits, the heritage necklace catching the dramatic lighting as she gestured elegantly while discussing the evening's charitable mission with potential donors and society reporters. "Celeste, darling," I called out as I approached, my voice carrying the warm sophistication I'd perfected through 15 years of high society events. "You look absolutely radiant tonight. That dress is simply divine." She turned toward me with a smile that seemed genuine, but didn't quite reach her calculating eyes. "Isabella, what a pleasure to see you. Thank you so much for organizing such a spectacular evening. The museum setting is absolutely inspired." "I couldn't help but notice your exquisite jewelry," I continued, moving closer to admire the necklace with obvious appreciation. Several other women gathered around us, drawn by the sparkle of the diamonds and the promise of sophisticated conversation. "Those pieces are absolutely breathtaking. The craftsmanship is extraordinary. Truly museum quality." Celeste's smile became more genuine as her vanity overrode whatever caution she might have felt. "Thank you. I'm so pleased you appreciate them. They're Tiffany, actually, from 1925. The history and artistry are simply incredible, don't you think?" "Oh my goodness, those are the Morrison Heritage Diamonds?" gasped Patricia Whitman, the society editor for Vanity Fair. "I remember when they were featured in that article about America's great jewelry collections. They're absolutely legendary pieces." Celeste's cheeks flushed with obvious pleasure. "They are indeed. Jonathan felt they deserved to be seen and appreciated, rather than locked away in some dusty vault. He thought tonight's charitable cause was the perfect occasion to bring them into the light." More people were gathering now, drawn by the mention of the famous Morrison collection and the obvious drama building in our little circle. Celeste was practically glowing with attention, completely unaware that she was providing testimony for her own prosecution with every word she spoke. "May I take a closer look?" I asked, reaching toward the necklace as if to examine its craftsmanship more carefully. I've always been fascinated by the technical aspects of these historic pieces. The way they cut diamonds in the 1920s was so different from modern techniques. Celeste practically preened as she leaned forward, clearly proud to display her acquisition to such an appreciative audience. I made a deliberate show of studying the diamonds with professional attention, turning the central stone to catch the light from multiple angles while the crowd watched in fascination. "Absolutely remarkable," I murmured, my voice carrying clearly across the increasingly quiet space around us. "The way these stones catch and refract light is just perfect, almost
too perfect, wouldn't you say? Like something designed specifically for stage lighting. Something in my tone made Celeste stiffen slightly, though her smile remained fixed. I'm not sure I understand what you mean by that.
I straightened up with a radiant smile, my voice projecting clearly across what had become a completely silent circle of 50 of New York's most connected people. Oh, I just mean they sparkle so magnificently under these museum lights, just like the theatrical replicas I had specially commissioned when I needed to store the authentic Heritage Suite in our more secure facility downtown. The craftsmanship on these reproductions is truly exceptional. You can barely tell they're just premium glass and silver-plated metal. The silence that followed was absolutely deafening. You could have heard a pin drop in that cavernous museum hall. Celeste's face went through a remarkable transformation, confusion melting into comprehension, then horror as she realized what I'd just announced to dozens of New York's most influential and well-connected people. That's impossible, she stammered, her hand flying instinctively to the necklace, as if to protect it. These are authentic. Jonathan gave them to me personally. They're worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. About $47, actually, I continued with serene pleasantness, though I suppose the sentimental value is considerably higher since they represent my husband's attempt to steal over $300,000 worth of my personal family heirlooms. The authentic Tiffany Heritage Suite is safely secured at Goldstein & Associates, where it's been professionally appraised and authenticated multiple times over the past several weeks. Celeste's face had gone completely ashen, her carefully applied makeup standing out starkly against her suddenly pale skin. Around us, the crowd was murmuring with excitement, phones appearing as people began documenting what was clearly becoming the scandal of the decade. "Jonathan!" Celeste called out desperately, her voice rising to a panicked pitch as she searched the crowd for him. But Jonathan had vanished the moment he'd realized what was happening, abandoning her to face the consequences of their scheme alone. Agent Martinez chose that precise moment to make her entrance, her FBI credentials clearly visible as she approached our growing circle of spectators. "Miss Celeste Hamilton, I'm Agent Sarah Martinez, Federal Bureau of Investigation. I need to speak with you immediately regarding stolen property and corporate espionage." "This is all a terrible mistake," Celeste protested, her composure completely shattered now. I don't know what she's talking about. I haven't stolen anything. These jewelry pieces were given to me as gifts." "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to remain calm and cooperate," Agent Martinez said firmly but professionally. "You're being detained for questioning regarding multiple federal crimes, including theft, fraud, and conspiracy. We have extensive video evidence of you unlawfully entering the Morrison residence and removing items from Mrs. Morrison's personal collection." As the federal agents moved in to escort Celeste from the museum, she finally lost what remained of her self-control completely. "You orchestrated this entire thing!" she screamed at me, struggling against the agent's professional but firm grip. "This is entrapment. You knew I would take them. You wanted me to take them." "I knew you had already taken them," I replied with perfect calm, my voice carrying clearly across the now silent museum hall. "Multiple times, in fact, over the course of several months. I simply provided you with an opportunity to display your theft publicly while wearing replicas of the jewelry you'd already stolen and presumably sold through your established network of black market dealers." The full scope of her situation hit her like a physical blow.
her mouth opened and closed wordlessly as she processed the implications. Not only had she been caught red-handed with stolen property, but she'd been publicly humiliated while wearing fake jewelry, believing herself to be displaying priceless family heirlooms to New York's social elite. As the agents led her away, her final words echoed across the museum's vaulted ceiling. "Where's Jonathan? He promised he'd protect me. We're married. He can't just abandon me like this." But Jonathan Morrison was nowhere to be found. In fact, as Agent Martinez informed me later that evening, he'd been arrested simultaneously at Teterboro Airport while attempting to board a private jet to the Cayman Islands with nearly $4 million in liquidated family assets and stolen corporate funds. The aftermath unfolded with swift and comprehensive precision. Jonathan and Celeste both faced multiple federal charges: wire fraud, money laundering, corporate espionage, conspiracy, and, in Jonathan's case, bigamy. The media coverage was extensive and relentless, with every financial publication and Society magazine covering the scandal that had brought down one of New York's most respected investment families. Celeste's trial revealed the full extent of their criminal enterprise. Over 2 years, they'd systematically looted Morrison family assets while feeding confidential client information to Sterling & Associates and other competing firms. The jewelry theft had just been one component of a much larger embezzlement scheme that had cost the family business over $12 million in lost assets and clients. But perhaps the most satisfying moment came during Celeste's sentencing hearing. As part of her plea agreement, she was required to provide information about the location of all stolen property. The authentic heritage suite, along with the rest of my jewelry collection, had been recovered from multiple safety deposit boxes she'd rented under various assumed identities throughout Manhattan. When the federal prosecutor presented the authentic pieces as evidence during the hearing, Celeste saw them side by side with the replicas for the first time since stealing the originals. The difference was subtle, but unmistakable to anyone who understood jewelry. The authentic stones had a depth and fire that no imitation could replicate, a luminosity that spoke of nearly a century of careful preservation and family history. The defendant was completely unaware that she'd been wearing costume jewelry to the Metropolitan Arts Foundation gala, the prosecutor explained to the federal judge. She believed she was publicly displaying authentic pieces valued at over $300,000. Instead, she'd been thoroughly humiliated while wearing theatrical replicas worth approximately $47. Celeste's defense attorney attempted to argue that this somehow constituted entrapment or prosecutorial misconduct, but the judge was thoroughly unimpressed with this line of reasoning. Miss Hamilton had already committed multiple felonies by stealing the original jewelry over a period of several months. Mrs. Morrison simply documented those existing crimes and provided an opportunity for public confession. The defendant's embarrassment is a direct consequence of her own criminal actions, not of any improper law enforcement conduct. Celeste received 8 years in federal prison without possibility of parole. Jonathan received 15 years, with additional civil penalties pending from both family lawsuits and Securities and Exchange Commission violations. Sterling & Associates faced regulatory sanctions, but ultimately survived, thanks to Robert Sterling's immediate cooperation with federal authorities and his swift termination of all business relationships with the conspirators. As for me, I found myself in a completely unexpected position. The scandal had made me something of a celebrity in certain circles, the brilliant wife who'd orchestrated the perfect revenge against corporate criminals. Financial magazines requested interviews, morning television shows wanted exclusive appearances, and several major publishers approached me about writing a book detailing the entire experience. What I wanted most, however, was to rebuild my life according to my own values and priorities. The penthouse was sold, along with most of its contents, to pay restitution to Morrison Capital's defrauded clients and damaged business partners. I purchased a charming brownstone in Greenwich Village, something that felt like home, rather than a museum or stage set. William Morrison offered me an executive position overseeing the family foundation's cultural and educational programs, work that utilized my art history expertise while connecting me to causes I genuinely cared about. For the first time in years, I was earning my own salary and making independent decisions about my professional future. The jewelry collection remained mostly in secure storage. I kept several meaningful pieces, my great-grandmother's pearls, a simple gold bracelet that had been my mother's, the sapphire earrings Jonathan had given me for our 5th anniversary before everything went wrong. The heritage suite returned to the family vault, where it would wait for the next generation of Morrison women who might appreciate its history and beauty. 8 months after the trial concluded, I received an unexpected phone call. Jennifer Reeves, David Reeves's daughter and a recent graduate from Columbia Law School, was starting her own practice specializing in financial crimes and asset recovery for fraud victims. She'd followed my case closely and wanted to offer her services to other women in similar situations. There are countless victims of financial fraud who never receive justice, she explained over lunch at a cafe near my new home. Usually because they lack the resources or knowledge to fight back effectively against sophisticated criminals. Your case demonstrated what's possible when someone has the courage and means to expose the truth systematically. We ended up forming a partnership, using my hard-won experience and her legal expertise to help other women who'd discovered their husbands were systematically stealing from them. It was deeply satisfying work, transforming my personal trauma into a tool for helping others achieve justice. 1 year after the gala, I attended the same charity event again. This time, I wore a simple navy blue dress and my great-grandmother's pearl necklace, my hair styled in loose waves rather than the elaborate updos I'd favored as Mrs. Jonathan Morrison. I looked different, felt different, more authentically myself than I had in many years. Several people approached me during the evening, some offering sympathy for what I had endured, others expressing admiration for how I'd handled such a devastating betrayal. But the conversation that meant the most came from a completely unexpected source. "Mrs. Morrison?" The voice was hesitant, almost apologetic. I turned to find a young woman in her early 30s, clearly nervous about approaching me. "It's Isabella Chen now, actually," I said, gently recognizing something vulnerable and familiar in her expression. "I'm Amanda Martinez," she said quietly, Agent Martinez's sister. "She told me about your case, and I think my husband is stealing from me, the same way yours was stealing from you. I don't know what to do or where to turn." I spent over an hour talking with Amanda, explaining the warning signs I'd missed for years, the evidence-gathering techniques that had proven crucial, the resources available to women in her situation. By the end of the evening, I'd given her Jennifer Reeves' contact information and promised to provide whatever support and guidance I could. That conversation crystallized something I'd been feeling for months. My experience with Jonathan and Celeste hadn't been just about personal revenge or justice. It had been about refusing to remain a victim, about taking control of my own narrative, about ensuring that truth and authenticity prevailed over manipulation and fraud.
The fake jewelry had been the perfect trap because it perfectly represented everything that was fundamentally wrong with Jonathan and Celeste's approach to life and relationships. They valued appearances over substance, theft over honest achievement, deception over authentic connection. When Celeste strutted through that museum wearing $47 replicas while believing she was displaying $300,000 family heirlooms, she was embodying the essentially hollow nature of their entire criminal enterprise. The authentic Heritage Suite represented something completely different. Generations of family history, legitimate wealth accumulated through decades of honest business practices, beauty created by master craftsmen and preserved through careful stewardship across nearly a century. Celeste could steal the physical pieces temporarily, but she could never possess their true value, meaning, or significance. In the end, that fundamental disconnect between appearance and reality brought down their entire operation. They thought they could steal not just jewelry and money, but identity and history and social standing. They believed that by taking my possessions, they could somehow claim my place in the world Jonathan had introduced me to 15 years earlier. But authentic identity isn't something that can be stolen, and genuine belonging isn't something that can be faked convincingly for long. When Celeste walked into that museum wearing my stolen jewelry, she wasn't becoming me or replacing me. She was revealing herself as exactly what she was: a sophisticated criminal who could imitate the superficial appearance of wealth and status, but would never possess their substance or legitimacy. 2 years after that museum evening, I received a letter from Celeste in federal prison. She'd been transferred to a minimum security facility and was working toward completing her undergraduate degree through a prison education program. The letter was part apology, part justification, and part plea for understanding. A complex mixture that revealed someone finally beginning to confront the consequences of her choices. "I know you probably think I'm just a gold digger who got exactly what she deserved," she wrote in surprisingly elegant handwriting. "And maybe that assessment is entirely accurate. But I grew up with absolutely nothing, watching women like you live the life I'd dreamed of having since childhood. When Jonathan offered me that life, even if it meant destroying yours in the process, I convinced myself I deserved it. I thought I'd earned it by being everything he claimed he wanted in a woman." She was absolutely right that I didn't owe her understanding, forgiveness, or sympathy. But reading her letter, I felt something I hadn't expected. Not compassion, exactly, but a recognition of how seductive Jonathan's promises must have been to someone who'd grown up believing that material wealth and social status were the only things that truly mattered in life. The crucial difference between us hadn't been moral superiority on my part or inherent evil on hers. It was that I'd learned through 15 years of marriage and its spectacular implosion that the things I'd thought mattered most, the jewelry, the penthouse, the social status, the perfect husband, were ultimately just props in someone else's performance of success. The real treasures in life were the relationships built on honesty, the work that provided genuine purpose, the knowledge that I could survive devastating betrayal and emerge stronger and more authentic. Those were things that couldn't be stolen, couldn't be counterfeited, couldn't be replicated, no matter how skilled the craftsperson or sophisticated the criminal.
Celeste's greatest punishment wasn't the federal prison sentence or the public humiliation at the museum. It was that she'd spent months believing she'd finally achieved the life she'd always fantasized about, only to discover it was as fake and worthless as the jewelry she'd worn to claim it. In trying to steal my identity and my life, she'd lost any authentic sense of her own. As for Jonathan, I never heard from him directly during his incarceration, but through his family, I learned that federal prison had been a harsh awakening for someone who'd spent his entire adult life believing he was entitled to whatever he wanted, whenever he wanted it. His attempts to blame everyone else for his crimes, me for setting elaborate traps, Celeste for seducing him away from virtue, his family for not understanding his visionary business strategies, had fallen on deaf ears with both federal judges and fellow inmates. The last I heard, he was working in the prison's educational department, teaching basic financial literacy classes to other inmates preparing for eventual release. Perhaps he'd finally found something genuinely worthwhile to do with his considerable talents, something that created actual value rather than destroying it for personal gain. Sometimes I wonder what might have happened if I'd confronted him directly instead of orchestrating that elaborate public exposure. Would he have admitted his crimes immediately, shown genuine remorse, attempted to make meaningful amends? Or would he have found some way to manipulate the situation, to make me doubt my own evidence, to convince me that I was overreacting to what he'd frame as harmless indiscretions blown out of proportion? I'll never know for certain, and I've made peace with that uncertainty. What I do know, beyond doubt, is that the path I chose, methodically gathering irrefutable evidence, building an airtight case, exposing the truth publicly and dramatically, ensured that justice was served, not just for me personally, but for all of Jonathan's victims. The employees who'd lost their jobs when Morrison Capital nearly collapsed, the investors who'd trusted him with their life savings, the family members who'd believed in his integrity and competence. The Metropolitan Arts Foundation Gala had been the perfect venue for that exposure because it represented everything Jonathan claimed to value: philanthropy, community service, cultural preservation, social responsibility. Having his crimes revealed in that setting, surrounded by the very people he'd been desperately trying to impress and emulate, stripped away any possibility of spinning the narrative to his advantage or claiming victim status. And Celeste's decision to wear the stolen jewelry to that particular event, to flaunt her theft in front of the entire cultural and social establishment, had made her complicit in her own spectacular downfall. She could have returned the pieces quietly once she'd satisfied her curiosity, could have ended the affair and walked away with her dignity intact. Instead, she chose to make a bold public statement about her conquest, never realizing she was announcing her crimes to hundreds of witnesses and several undercover federal agents.